The conference has been muted.
So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our first Fridays this month. Our topic today is going to be focusing on criminal justice and people with disabilities. And we're really excited to have two great speakers with us. One is Ashley Brompton from the Vera Institute of Justice's Center on Victimization and Safety. And she was also formerly the Criminal Justice Fellow at the ARC National's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. Also joining us today is Melissa Heifet. She is now Interim Executive Director at the ARC of Loudoun. So they're going to talk to us today about some of their experiences working in criminal justice and the intersection between criminal justice and people with disabilities. I will let them take it away and introduce themselves because they know themselves a little bit better than I do. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Brompton. I am an attorney by education but haven't practiced in a while. I started out doing disability advocacy growing up. I am a sibling, so it's always been a part of my life. I am a third-generation disability advocate. I originally started my career working in public defender offices, advocating for people with mental health disabilities. And then I transitioned to go to the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, where I focused on the intersection of intellectual and developmental disabilities and criminal justice. And now I am at a criminal justice organization where I am bringing a lot of disability perspective. So I know that Melissa's going to talk a lot about her experience on a sort of local level. What I'm going to do is kind of paint the broad picture, the national picture of why this matters and what is going on out there. So I wanted to start by sort of defining the issues and giving some broad level analysis to why should we care. You know, we have so much going on right now. We had healthcare votes going on yesterday. We've had all sorts of things. So why is criminal justice important when we've got all this other stuff on our plates? So people with IDD are more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system as either a victim or a suspect offender. Their risk levels are actually higher for both victimization and offending. So why? There's some different issues depending on whether you're looking at why people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are victimized versus why they offend. So the biggest reason for victimization is sort of this societal culture of ableism, and people with disabilities are seen as weak and vulnerable and sort of easy prey. There's sort of a saying that the best victim is the one that can't talk about it, the one that can't tell people what's going on and that this is a problem. There are a lot of communication barriers. Lack of education around sexuality is a huge one, especially when you look at the large number of sex offenses that you see. By far, people with IDD are the most likely, even amongst people with disabilities, to have sexual offenses committed against them. And then when you look at offending and sort of perpetrators, again, if you have sexual offenses, a lot of it stems from a lack of education, a lack of teaching of boundaries and what appropriate affection looks like. You see a history of abuse and a cycle of victimization and offending, people who think that this is the way that I was treated, and so this is how you express affection or love. A desire to fit in with the crowd, so kids that are in school and they want to have friends, and so they agree to go with one of their friends and rob a convenience store because their friend really wants to, and they want to be part of that. They want to be part of the group. And you see that a lot. Difficulty projecting consequences, knowing that what they're doing is even wrong, that they could get in trouble for this because they just don't really necessarily always see those consequences, and that it is, in society's mind, a crime or wrong in any way. So these are some of the common issues that we've seen with people with IDD in the criminal justice system. So you can see that I've kind of broken it up into victims and witnesses and then suspects or defendants. So when we talk about terminology, I will kind of go between victim, witness, survivor, and then I'll go between offender, perpetrator, suspect. For my purposes, they're all kind of interchangeable, although they obviously have different actual meanings. So when you look at victims and witnesses, the biggest issues that you see really involve credibility in the criminal justice system, so they're not believed. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities report abuse, they report a crime, and police tell them, well, we can't get a good story out of you, we don't have enough to move forward. Or the district attorney or the Commonwealth attorney, as you guys here call them, or other prosecutor says, you know, the jury's not going to understand or believe your point of view, and they've got this defendant who is just going to be really believable compared to you. Again, they don't necessarily know what violence or abuse is, or what their experience is violence or abuse. They might confuse behaviors for friendship, so they don't even think that this is any sort of victimization or predatory behavior. It's just someone being a friend. When you look at suspect defendants, you see a lot of the same issues when it comes to being eager to please, wanting to fit in. So you see a lot of susceptibility to things like false confessions, because police are allowed to really go in and in many circumstances just lie to people. And people who are of neurotypical ability, don't have a disability, might be able to know that. They might be able to pick up on social cues or other ways to make them think, well, maybe they're not completely telling the truth. Someone with an intellectual or developmental disability might be particularly susceptible to that kind of manipulation. Sometimes they just don't know what they were doing. So maybe they have a co-occurring mental health disability or psychiatric disability, and they were off their medication, or maybe they didn't know that what they were doing is wrong, or they don't understand the role of the court system. So how can you charge someone with a crime and have due process and a fair trial if they don't know what's going on? They might not understand police commands. So you see that in cases like what happened with Ethan Saylor in Maryland, where he just didn't understand what those police officers wanted from him, and there was a tragic end result because of that. So those are just some of the issues that you see. The cloak of competence is really, really common and really specific to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities more than any other type of disability. And it really is this idea that someone knows that they have a disability, or they know that they're different. Maybe they just know that something is different about them than everyone else. But they want to hide that because they want to be liked, they want to fit in, they want to be normal. And so they don't want to tell police officers, I have a disability, can you please explain this to me? Or I have a disability, can you please make sure that my mom, my dad, my guardian, my lawyer is here with me while you talk to me. And that happens with victims too. They get on the stand, and a lot of times defense attorneys are really able to manipulate victims because they're trying to put on a face to the world that shows something that doesn't disclose. They're very personal, and oftentimes they have a lot of shame about their disability, and they don't want to just expose that to a bunch of strangers sitting in a jury box. So it's the same thing. So those are just some of the issues that face. So why should the disability community, the ARC, and other advocates really care about this issue? Community living, community integration really has increased risk here for both victimization and offending. You look at things like mainstreaming in schools, which is great for children with disabilities, but then you see arrests in schools, and you see kids getting tased in schools because school resource officers don't know how to act with a child with autism or a child with Down syndrome. You see kids or adults who are just out in their community. They go to the movie theater, they go out and about to the grocery store, and they are constantly interacting with people who don't understand them. And while that's great for them, because that's what we want, right? We want integration. We want them to be a part of the community. It also comes with increased risks that people need to be aware of. Disabilities are often invisible, so especially when you're looking at psychiatric disabilities or intellectual and developmental disabilities, that's not always a visible thing, right? So police officers can't just see someone and know that they have autism, for example. They can't just see someone and know that they have that they're bipolar and they might be off their medication. So that adds a risk level. If people don't know what they're looking for, they can't adequately address it and respond adequately in those situations. And then, you know, the ARC, the national office, was getting hundreds and hundreds of calls from parents and lawyers and police officers and friends and self-advocates who were saying, we have problems here. Like, this is an issue that we need to address, and no one is talking about it. No one is talking about, especially the offending side of things, that people with disabilities can commit crimes, and how do we address that? And so until we start addressing it, who else is going to look to this population, right? So criminal justice professionals, they're looking at all this criminal justice reform. Legislators are looking at all this criminal justice reform. But people with disabilities are often left out of those conversations. So you look, for instance, at sexual assault statutes that were crafted, which are great and they protect people, but what they don't do is give people with disabilities the right to have consensual sexual relationships in a lot of states. What they don't do is take into consideration the needs and specific desires and wants and human traits of people with disabilities. So unless disability advocates are getting involved, no one else is going to do it. No one else even knows to do it. And so there was no, before NCCJD came around and before the ARC really took on this issue with our chapter base, there was really no national effort to bring intellectual and developmental disabilities into the conversation. And again, until we start speaking for ourselves and speaking for our loved ones and speaking for the people that we serve and care for, we can't accomplish anything in the criminal justice system because everyone else just doesn't care. We also believe very strongly that one agency, one organization can't do it by themselves. They need to create a network, create a sort of a group of people within their community, within their organization that is really passionate about this to make a difference. And without that sort of outreach to bring in new people, that will never happen. So looking at, skip the slide. So looking at violence against people with disabilities, this was the traditional focus of disability organizations. If they talked about criminal justice issues at all, going back in history, it was from a very protectionism point of view where it was, how do we protect these people who are so vulnerable? How do we ensure their safety and security? And it's sort of evolved into, we understand that this risk is here, how do we address it? This is a more known issue. There have been studies and research, although not a ton, because federal funders specifically don't like to fund research in this area, and that's one of the issues that I'll talk about a little bit later. But we do know that some people with disabilities, for example, experience an increased rate of domestic and sexual violence. So people with disabilities make up just over 14% of the population, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, who kind of is really the only federal agency who's looked at people with disabilities in the criminal justice system. But they are twice as likely to be victims of crime. So they are very much overrepresented as victims and survivors of crime within the criminal justice system. Women who experience intimate partner violence are more likely to also report a disability. So people with disabilities who are experiencing intimate partner violence, they have an increased likelihood that they have a disability. 49% of people with developmental disabilities will be victimized 10 or more times in their lifetime. So it just becomes a cycle where this becomes normal. This becomes something that people feel like they have to accept. And that is not okay. It is never okay to say that someone can be sexually assaulted or victimized because they have a disability, and it doesn't matter. Violent crime, when I refer to violent crime up here, the Bureau of Justice Statistics does not split up their research by type of crime. So violent crime includes everything from murder to assault to sexual assaults to burglary. So it's a very broad category, but it just gives an overall view of crime rates against people with disabilities. The next one is really, why do we need to address offenders with disabilities? This is an area that no one was looking at up until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. The ARC's national office has had someone on staff working on criminal justice for over 20 years, and her name is Leanne Davis, and she's great. But for much of her time there, at least in the beginning, she was focusing exclusively on victimization issues because that's what you could get funding for. That's what you had some support behind from the advocates in the communities. But we've noticed with more community integration, there has not been more education, more preparing self-advocates and people with disabilities for what it's like living in the community, some of the unique challenges. There has not been more education of law enforcement and schools and court systems about people with disabilities as they're coming into the criminal justice system. So we have seen offending rates explode, but there's no research that backs it up because no one funds research on this. We know a couple of things. We know that people with IDD, at the last check that we had, were 3% of the population. They are 9% of the prison population. So they are 3 times overrepresented within the prison population. There are 25,000 people at least, and this was as of a few years ago, who have an intellectual or developmental disability. And this is just people who have been diagnosed with an intellectual or developmental disability. This is not including people who don't have a diagnosis, that are in the prison system right now, that aren't getting services. We know that they are more likely to plead guilty to original charges. There are no specialized courts, with one exception. There is a developmental disabilities court in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Cleveland has a really great developmental disabilities court. The National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability did a webinar, it's on their website, which I'll let you all know what it is, about mental health courts and why they don't always serve people with developmental and intellectual disabilities well. And we profiled that court as sort of a model of how it could work in connecting services to people with IDD and diversion. We know that there are issues with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and probation. They don't know how to follow probation rules. Some of these probation rules are archaic and difficult, and if they have a sex offense, it's even worse. They're on a sex offender registry, and they don't know that they can't walk by the school on their way to 7-Eleven to get coffee, and that causes them to then reoffend and end up in jail or prison. You see it with housing. So people with disabilities often live in subsidized housing. If they have a sex offense, which can be anything from the most common that we saw at NCCJD, and they still see, is young 18 to 25-year-old men with autism who form relationships with the people who intellectually and developmentally are their peers, which are 14, 15-year-old girls, and have relationships with them, and then are labeled sex offenders for life after that. And they are then banned from public housing. It puts their benefits at risk. It puts their ability to live in the community, which is the goal for people with disabilities, at risk. It puts their ability to participate in vocational opportunities, in day programs at risk. So there are a whole host of consequences that we need to address. And all we have right now is anecdotal evidence. We don't have any hard data on this because no one will fund hard data for this right now. on a national scope. So what I'm going to do now is kind of transition. So I'm in a kind of unique position because I've worked for a disability organization who has decided that criminal justice is a priority for them. And I now work at a criminal justice organization who has decided that disability is a priority for them. And those perspectives are very different. So I'm going to share a little bit about the ARC's approach, and I know that Melissa's going to talk more in depth about what she's doing with the national office right now here locally. But what are the paths towards solutions that these organizations are bringing forward? What can we actually do to make these problems that I've addressed better? How can we organize in our local communities to make them better? So the ARC's National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability was created in 2013 with a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is part of the Department of Justice. Their grant was renewed in 2015, and they were funded to be a national clearinghouse for information and training on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as victims, witnesses, and suspects offenders. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, the ARC really understood that you could not address one side of this issue without the other. They are the only organization, at the time that they were founded, they were the only organization who was looking at both sides of this issue, at victims' issues and offending issues. And that is why BJA thought they brought a lot of value and wanted to fund them and continued to fund them and continues to fund them today. Things like victimization in jails and prisons, things like the cycle of victimization and offending, these are things where those two areas overlap. And addressing one part of things is not going to solve it. And also, the same accommodations are often needed whether you're dealing with a victim or witness or a suspect offender. So when it comes to communication, for example, a lot of those communication techniques and accommodations are the same for a police officer who's interrogating someone as they would be for a police officer who is getting a statement from a victim. So why would we only address half of that coin? So these are some of the issues that NCCJD has seen in the years that we've been around. Again, the most common victims issues. So part of what NCCJD does is an information and referral service. So getting calls from all over the country from concerned parents, concerned attorneys, law enforcement officers, victim service providers, and people with disabilities themselves who are saying, can you help me, or can you connect me to resources? So we have this database of over 650 people who have asked for assistance. And so we can pick up some trends. And for victims, it really is about getting courts, getting attorneys to realize that I'm credible, that I have that my experience is valid, that my perpetrator deserves to see justice as much as their perpetrator would if they had violence committed against them. And the most common offense for both victims and offenders that we see are sex offenses. We see tons and tons of sex offenses and sexual violence against people with disabilities. And it really goes back to this idea that people with disabilities are not seen as sexual creatures in any way, shape, or form. And so their victimization is kind of just swept under the rug in a lot of ways by the court system. And offending is not addressed. No one is educating people about healthy sexuality, healthy relationships, etc. So the profile of an offender that we've seen, they're male, they have a mild intellectual disability or developmental disability that is often not even really on the radar of most people that they interact with. Maybe they have an IEP, but that's about it. Or they get some services, but they function in the community and hold a job. They're aware of their disability and they try to hide it. They are oftentimes unemployed. They're usually between 20 and 40 years old, although we've seen that number start to come down as more kids in school are facing disciplinary actions and arrests for actions that happen in school. And they often commit crimes in concert with other people. So when you're looking at a lot of the crimes that you see for offenders, you see that they were with someone else. They had a co-defendant. And that co-defendant is often someone who does not have a disability. And so that's sort of the profile of what we see. When it comes to offenders, it's often, how do I get my attorney to understand my disability? Competency, how do I get my attorney to understand that I don't really know what's going on? We get tons of parents who say, you know, they have no idea that their attorney is working for them. What do we do to show the court and the attorney that they don't understand that they have an attorney who's advocating for them, which is a requirement for competency to stand trial? Mitigation, diversion, that's a huge thing. The ARC of New Jersey has a great diversion program that they've run since the 1980s, their criminal justice advocacy program, and we've worked with them a lot around diversion, and then death penalty cases. The ARC gets a lot of requests to write letters for clemency petitions because the Supreme Court has said that you cannot execute someone with an intellectual disability. It violates the Eighth Amendment. It's cruel and unusual punishment. However, you see people continuously, and we were just talking about this right before we started today, continuously being imprisoned, put on death row, executed last week. Someone with a diagnosed intellectual disability was executed in Arkansas despite the ARC and numerous other organizations coming out and saying, we're not advocating for a punishment-free paradigm. We understand that people with disabilities have just as much of an ability to commit horrible, evil crimes. You know, they're not exempt from human condition, right? But what we are saying is that those people do not understand and have the ability to be put to death for those crimes. So that's kind of what we see. We see a lot of drug offenses as well, self-medication. Marijuana usage was pretty common, like low-level crimes like that. Theft, that people just don't know that that's even a crime sometimes. So that's kind of what they've seen. So how are we addressing it? So Pathways to Justice is the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disabilities training program. Melissa's going to sort of get into more detail at how it works at a local level when they come in to do the training. But it's a 1 or 2 day training depending on whether you do the crisis intervention training pilot that they've just started. And it trains sort of a multidisciplinary group of people. So it focuses on 3 real audiences: law enforcement officers, victim service professionals, and attorneys. And so what it does, it brings all these different professions into one room and says, let's hear the issues, let's talk about the issues, let's open people's eyes, and then get them to sort of group think about how we can address those issues in our community. So what it does is it's a standard program, but it's very customizable to your locality, the issues that you see. It kind of creates a coordinated response using an interdisciplinary team, which is called a disability response team, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So the training is put on by Leanne Davis at the national office, as well as right now the new criminal justice fellow, who's Ariel Sims. And then the chapter of the ARC, who has brought in the national office to do this training. But then in addition to that, we have law enforcement coming in to help train. So there's law enforcement on this disability response team to train other law enforcement. We have victim service providers coming in to train other victim service providers. And we have attorneys coming in to train other attorneys. So while we create this interdisciplinary team and this interdisciplinary training experience, it's also really peer-to-peer education. It doesn't rely on training alone. It sort of creates this infrastructure for addressing these issues in your community. And since 2013, they've piloted in Maryland, with the ARC of Maryland, in Spokane, Washington, in Pikes Peak, Colorado, with the ARC of the Midlands in Central South Carolina, and with the ARC of New Jersey. And this year they have already trained with the ARC of New Mexico, the ARC of Winnebago, Boone, and Ogle counties, which is just outside of Chicago, Illinois, I believe Loudoun County is next on the list, and then they will also be going to Massachusetts and Texas this year. And several of those locations, I don't know if Loudoun County is one of them, are also doing a sort of CIT pilot for officers, for law enforcement officers who are trained in crisis intervention techniques, on how those crisis intervention techniques can be adapted for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this is what a disability response team looks like. This is really what makes Pathways to Justice unique, which makes the ARC's response to criminal justice issues unique. It's this interdisciplinary team of people who bring different expertise, they bring different experiences, and they bring different challenges. So law enforcement has seen horrible things in their careers, right? So police officers have this perspective of, we need to keep people safe because if we don't, catastrophic, horrible things will happen, because we've seen that. Attorneys have seen, victims who they've been unsuccessful in getting convictions against the perpetrators because the jury just did not believe the victim. Or they're a defense attorney who has seen their client, who they know has a severe intellectual disability, end up in prison for something that they don't even know that they did. So everyone has a unique perspective, and again, the chapter of the ARC really takes the lead in the project with the National Center and customizes it. And all of these people come together, they work on the training, and then they go ahead and do their community training. They put on the training. So it's not the ARC, the national office, coming in and saying, we are going to train you. It's the national office coming in and kind of giving background and support and assistance and helping the communities build this group. This is what the Pathways to Justice model looks like. So the previous slide, this slide is sort of the abbreviated version, and you can see that it's got different stages. The top is the different stages for suspect offenders, and the bottom is for victims or survivors, and also witnesses. So this more detailed one, what it does is it really breaks down each stage of a criminal case. So, and then with each stage, so we have several stages: community, first contact, investigation, jail, trial and plea agreements, transition, and then community again. And what it does is for each stage, it identifies some of the main issues that come up, some of the main barriers to justice that people with disabilities, with intellectual and developmental disabilities specifically face. So for instance, under suspect offender, in investigation, you see false confessions, possible accomplices. And then in jail and trial, you see medication, screening for IDD in jail, making sure that they are safe when they are incarcerated. And so what that does is it gives these DRTs and the community at large sort of a graphical understanding of where the points are that they should look at, and allows them to say, we've seen in our experience that during the initial arrest, we've seen a lot of issues there, so we really want to focus in on that. And then we also really want to focus in on training correctional officers in our local jail, because we think we've seen a lot of issues there, and kind of pinpointing what they want to focus on. But these are sort of the most common gaps, and again, this is available on the NCCJD's website. So you can see it in its entirety. I know you might not be able to see it, it's a little far away and small, but it really just kind of outlines for people what the main issues are, what people should really focus on. And so with the training, NCCJD does a whole host of other activities to serve people with disabilities and bring this issue to the national forefront. The training and technical assistance is the Pathways to Justice training, and then they also do quarterly webinars, which are generally attended by several hundred people nationwide, including, depending on the topic, law enforcement, victim service providers, attorneys, disability organizations, funders, foundations, government agencies, to try to raise awareness about this issue and educate people. So some of the past topics have been on things like competency, on victimization issues, on police responses. It's a whole host of activities. The other thing is information and referral. As I said, they've collected probably now, I've been gone from there since November, probably over 700 at this point, just anecdotal cases that they have in this database to say, look, listen to these people. These people are here and we're trying to help them. They do everything from writing letters to courts on people's behalf to say, please look into diversion for this person. They have a disability. Here are the factors. They write letters to jails a lot and prisons and say this person has a disability and you are not adequately accounting for this, and it's putting their safety and security while they're in your custody at risk. They have done public policy work, advocating for sentencing reform on the Hill. We have a policy person who was working on the sentencing reform bill that stalled last year. They've done conferences and presentations all over the country. They have a huge online resource center. So they have resources for specific groups of people, so specific professions. They have resources for the general public. They have white papers on topics ranging from victimization and bullying to juvenile justice issues for people with IDD to competency, and then also sex offending and some of the unique considerations for people with IDD who find themselves caught up in the sex offender system. And this year they'll be having a new one on law enforcement and sort of police interactions with people with IDD. So they do a ton of work. They also have a legislative database where you can go in and click on your state and see what the laws are in areas such as sex offender registration, competency, some of the specific issues that we've seen come up for people with IDD. So it's really a great resource to find out how you can take this information and bring it back to your community. And with that, I'm kind of going to let Melissa handle the rest of talking about NCCJD and how they come to your community, and shift gears to look at how this criminal justice organization has really decided that disability is something that they want to address and how they've done it and why they've done it. So I currently work for the Vera Institute of Justice, if I didn't skip a ton of slides. Okay. So the Vera Institute of Justice was established in 1961 in New York City. It was originally established in protest of the bail practices, which it kind of has come full circle because now we are once again in this era of unjust bail practices for people who are charged with crimes. But our founder just really had a strong belief that we needed to reform the bail system in New York City. And so he created this foundation, and eventually it turned into a nonprofit that advocated for criminal justice reform and bail reform just in New York City. Since those days, we have grown a lot. We have 6 projects all over the country. We work on criminal justice systems nationwide. We have 10 centers and programs and over 200 employees. We have offices. Our main office is in New York City, where about 160 of our employees work, and then we have an office in DC where I work, and then we have a very small office in Los Angeles and a small office in New Orleans. And so what we've done is take on these criminal justice issues, everything from our Center on Immigration and Justice, which focuses on the intersection of immigration and the criminal justice system. We have a Center on Sentencing and Corrections, which focuses just on sentencing and corrections, shockingly enough. And then we have the Center on Victimization and Safety, which is where I work, which is really where we've seen our disability work come out. So CVS was created 12 years ago now, and our founding director is still our director, and she's sort of the impetus, Nancy Smith. She's been an advocate in the field for a very long time, and she really wanted to look at how the criminal justice system serves victims of crime. And what we started with is looking at who are the most marginalized people in society. And what Nancy and later on the rest of the leadership within the center discovered is that it really is people with disabilities. People with disabilities are, you know, the hot topic now is racial equity in the criminal justice system, or, you know, making sure that every ethnicity, religious group is protected within the criminal justice system. No one was talking about how victims with disabilities were treated in the criminal justice system, so CVS decided to do that. Our largest project is the Accessing Safety Initiative, which also incorporates, we have several chapters of the ARC who are actually part of that, and that is an Office on Violence Against Women funded program, and we are the national comprehensive TA provider for it. So what it does is it pairs a disability service provider organization, such as a chapter of the ARC or other. We also have a lot of deaf collaborations that we work with. And it pairs them with an anti-violence organization. So it might be a rape crisis center, or it might be a domestic violence shelter, or a family justice center. And we pair them together in these collaborations where these two groups of people come together and form almost a third entity, which is really a molding of these two groups. And what it does is it helps the disability organization understand how to address their clients, the people that they serve, who have been victims of sexual or domestic violence or other types of violence. And it helps the anti-violence organization understand how to be accessible with people with disabilities, because they're just not. We've worked with about just over 100 communities since the project started. We have 26 communities currently, ranging from the middle of nowhere in Kansas to New York City to Los Angeles and everywhere in between. And it really creates this collaboration where we've finally got disability organizations really internalizing what they need to do to be responsive to people who have experienced victimization. And we finally have anti-violence organizations who really understand what it's like for people with disabilities. So many of our collaborations are disability organizations that focus on IDD, or we have several deaf collaborations. We have some that have independent living centers as partners. We have some that focus just on psychiatric disabilities and mental health, so it's a much broader sort of scope. Some of the other projects that we work on everything from violence against people with disabilities in carceral settings, so in prisons and jails. We work on all sorts of other justice issues for disabilities. You can see the list of all the projects that we work on. Our newest project is a $10 million underserved resource center, which will focus on, it's funded by the Office of Victims of Crime, and it will focus on several marginalized populations within the victims community. Disability is one of them, LGBTQ folks, people of color specifically. We've got indigenous populations, so it really focuses on victimization as a whole and then looking at each of these marginalized communities. We have a deaf TA project that just really helps deaf organizations address victimization and safety issues. We have a disability indicators project which helps disability organizations and anti-violence organizations assess how they are addressing. So basically it's a survey that you take, that you do within your organization that helps you assess your capabilities and your institutional capacity to address these issues. But we again look at it from a criminal justice perspective. So we look at it from, we want to make the criminal justice system as fair as we can, and this is how we do it. So some of our strategies for change is promoting equality and increasing inclusion, which I think is a strategy that we can all agree on as being the most important way to accomplish our goals, is how do we make sure that people with disabilities are considered on an equal playing field with everyone else. Building partnerships, again, creating these collaborations, raising awareness and fostering accountability, so teaching people what the issues are, what they need to know, and then really holding them accountable, saying, following up with people and saying, you've said you were doing this, but it just doesn't look like you are, and how can we make sure that you're really progressing towards this goal? Strengthening prevention. We see a lot of resources going into, especially resources from the federal government, going into addressing these issues after they happen, but we don't see a lot of resources going into prevention and education. So for instance, one of our biggest pushes is for education around healthy sexuality, so that people who are sexually victimized know, people with disabilities who experience sexual victimization, they know what's going on. They're able to tell someone that this is not okay. They're able to report it in a way that makes sense. We have found that people with disabilities oftentimes are completely uncomfortable even using correct terminology for things, and it doesn't make a safer environment to have people in the dark. Increasing research and evaluation. Again, like I said at the very beginning, there's just not a lot of research around this. So one of the things that Vera does very well is we have 50-plus PhDs on our staff, and all they do is do research. We have a huge research department, and so we've really focused on how can we do research and have sort of data-driven results around this, so that we can go to people and say, here's some statistics, because that's what people listen to, especially people who, as nonprofits, we're all trying to get funding from and help from. And then the last is enhancing services, so just increasing access to services, making sure that service providers understand the unique dynamics. And then so some of the ways that we do this, I'm not trying to promote myself here, but I am. We have a great website that, again, has a lot of really great information. It's www.endabusepwd.org. And on that website, you can find a ton of resources and also find information on all of the collaborations. So maybe you want to see all of the collaborations who are in Northern Virginia so that you can reach out to people and see what their experience has been like. You can look at a map, click on Northern Virginia, and find all of the collaborations in Virginia, or in DC or in Maryland. So it's a really great resource. We use it every day, even in our day-to-day work. We have our webinars that we do. So our next one is actually on Tuesday, and it's on law enforcement and people with disabilities. So one of the presenters is Leanne Davis from the National Office of the ARC to talk about IDD and sort of law enforcement best practices for addressing people with IDD, specifically victims and survivors. And then the other part of the presentation is hosted by a collaboration out of Cuyahoga County, Cleveland, Ohio. Again, they're just very progressive with their disability work in that area, which is a deaf collaboration. So we'll actually have a few deaf presenters coming on to talk about how they've addressed it within the deaf community and the Cleveland Division of Police. And the tips, yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I work as a legal court interpreter for Fairfax County.
Okay.
As you're mentioning that, these webinars or these trainings happen, do you right now collaborate with the court system here so that you could train individuals? Because I've gone to training myself about different topics, and this is a perfect topic just to bring right to the court.
So we have one of our initiatives is actually around training courts specifically around deaf access issues, right. Just because that's the grant that we got. So we do go out and train courts around deaf access. What I would say is that NCCJD is actually a really great, so the training that they're bringing to Loudoun County in just a couple weeks is a really great opportunity to bring court staff into that, because we do a whole unit of that training is just for legal professionals and attorneys, and how the courts work and how accommodations in a courtroom. And they've also done some really great webinars around that as well.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, I know in the court system also just individuals, not only attorneys, but receive some of this training, so that it just builds, like you're saying, awareness.
Right. And a lot of courts also, it's the ADA mandates that courthouses have ADA coordinators. In some states, they've interpreted that as every courthouse having one. In other states, they've interpreted it as every judicial district, which in some states means a very large geographical area has one person that is addressing ADA issues. But that's a great audience to train as well, because then they can take it to the entire courthouse. So how do we get them to come to Pathways to Justice trainings, which would be perfect for them as well?
So we actually, so our training in Loudoun County is May 23rd, and I'll give you my card so if you want to go on the website and register, it's free. But we have invited the clerk of the court in Loudoun. What courthouse are you in?
Fairfax County.
Yeah, I mean, anyone is
juvenile
welcome.
and juvenile domestic.
Everyone is welcome to come, and if you give me a contact person or if I send it to you and you spread the word, everyone is welcome to come to ours. It's really the same county to county.
Or if you bring it to the courthouse, because often what happens is that individuals invite me to a training and it's about a really hot topic and there's just a lot of people there and they're hitting a lot of different, and then they, train different groups, or they invite a lot of different people from different groups to one training. So
yeah, I mean, we will come to you and make it easy and coordinate whatever day works, but I'd be happy to come.
All right, great.
And the national office as well is just in D.C. The criminal justice fellow who is there now, I actually trained her. She's great, and she's in the D.C. office. Leanne is actually based out of Texas, but we're in a unique position being so close to D.C. that they could even come out if you wanted to, or in coordination with a local chapter, one of the local chapters, come to the courthouse. They've done it before. Vera has done it if you wanted us to come out and talk to, because we have a lot more experience talking directly to criminal justice people. So we kind of know their language as opposed to the language of the disability world that a lot of, court staff is like, what does that mean? I don't even understand. Vera is in a unique position where we kind of straddle a line of criminal justice and disability in a way that makes us accessible to everyone. And I'm just in D.C. as well. We have a newsletter that comes out every month, and I'm really excited about the newsletter because we've recently revamped it. So now every month I've created a Raise Your Voice section, which kind of highlights the voices of people with disabilities. So last month for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we had a self-advocate from Illinois put a great poem in the newsletter that talks about how people with disabilities themselves need to be included in the movement to end sexual violence. And you cannot have a complete movement to end sexual violence without people with disabilities in it, and how she wants to personally be included in that fight. This month our newsletter is around people with disabilities who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and we have a great advocate who spent 24 years in the correctional system in California and is a victim of repeated and multiple sexual assaults while he was incarcerated, and now he's come out 24 years later and he spends all of his time advocating for the Prison Rape Elimination Act and applying that to people with disabilities and vulnerable people in prison environments. So we have a lot of really great stuff coming up there. Conferences and trainings, again, we're always willing to present and collaborate with other organizations. We work very, very closely with the ARC's national office, with Leanne Davis. We have several chapters of the ARC who we work with. The two that I think of off the top of my head are the ARC of Greater Twin Cities in Minnesota. We've had a long-standing relationship with them. And we just started working with the ARC of Bristol County in Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. So we do a lot around that as well. And so my contact information is up there. I also have some business cards if you want to talk or you want me to connect you to someone else who we have a lot of connections all across the country on a variety of topics. So just let me know. And with that, I will pass it over to Melissa to talk more about Pathways to Justice.
You all want to get up and stretch and get a drink or anything before I start? Yeah. Through the brown door you came in, down the hallway. Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm very informal.
He's actually going to get to go. I'm so jealous to your can't come. I'd love to go. Boss.
Who is your boss? Is she really? Oh, yeah.
It was
So we've actually been looking at there's training programs in Canada right
The one in Heifet, this county we talked about earlier, does not disability, and we had a very long discussion with them. And their disability in Florida is undiagnosed.
Oh my God.
That doesn't make a lot of sense, but
I feel like we have these systems, but they don't actually clear it up.
I know. I'm going to start off with how the cases that come out of into this, and like really things that are out of control really fast.
they really brought that to be an issue, and in every conversation we had,
People back in.
whether an organization addresses FAID. So,
Yeah, I know that was a lot.
Yeah.
we're never leaving it at the end of the slides on the archive. Right.
Actually, right now. Do you guys do webinars for?
I don't know, there's never done
Right. It took all.
Yeah, we need to do that.
We did one on supported decision making.
Right. Oh my God. Yeah, we need to figure, and then can people watch them after? Yeah, see that? What exactly, so you organize, what is the stuff you do?
But
You can introduce yourself first.
I do support services for trust clients, but now actually for any client in the arts, so it can be anything.
Anything they need, basically.
Yeah, Medicaid, housing vouchers, Social Security applications, employment. I do all of those, go on the DARS meeting. Really. Yeah. And then some of it, I created like advocacy plans to help forward, but I also get a lot of crisis situations.
So a lot of what we do in our advocacy is like you do.
It's great, but I feel like I'm a case manager, but I'm actually an attorney.
Yeah.
It's a very weird feeling.
Yeah, I always have felt halfway between a lawyer and a social worker. Yeah, and right. I've always liked that because I was kind of between both. But actually, while I'm interim executive director for the advocacy team, she's an advocate, she's a social worker, and I love. When I was at Legal half hour.
And that's what we hear, so many, especially parents.
I love working with social workers.
Because, I mean, how many times in legal office that I worked at, people came in and it was,
We follow the highest accessibility standards. All of our webinars have live captioning, live ASL interpreting. We ensure that all of
I know.
never actually
appropriate for people. Have you looked at New Jersey, their criminal justice advocacy project? That's what I want to create eventually.
All right,
We'll do that. Okay, guys, I think we have to start because I know I have a hard stop at 12.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, you can just click it if you want.
Or what do I do?
All right, so I think we're going to get started.
Lisa Glasscap. So my name is Melissa Heifet, and I'll tell you a quick background on myself. I'm a lawyer as well, licensed in Maryland and New York, so not Virginia. So I started off as a legal aid attorney in New York City in the Juvenile Rights Division doing abuse and neglect cases in Bronx Family Court. And really have always been a child advocate, or really just someone, I've always just wanted to give a voice to people who don't have their own voice. At the ARC, I've been with the ARC for the last 3 years, and I started off in our Advocacy Center. So the ARC of every ARC is set up a little bit differently. So the ARC of Loudoun, we're on 17 acres in Leesburg, and we have a big campus, and we have a school for kids with, well, it's for any disability, but primarily we serve kids with autism who are pretty profoundly affected with a lot of behaviors. We have a preschool for kids with and without disabilities. That's a totally integrated preschool, and we have an advocacy center. So I started off in our advocacy center, and in the advocacy center we provide free consultation services to people. So anything they walk in the door with, whether it's transportation or their IEPs or help meeting a job or housing or really anything they come in with. But within my first year there, we received many calls about people being arrested. And it was my first foray into this situation. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about 3 cases that have really influenced what we're doing at the ARC of Loudoun. And we created a program that we call our PILE program that stands for Positive Interactions with Law Enforcement, and why we thought this was really, really important for us to start working on and putting a lot of time into. So the first is Troy's case. Troy's case was probably within my first, 6 months of working at the ARC. And Troy is a 22-year-old with autism and an intellectual disability who graduated from high school, had no Medicaid waiver, no day program, no job, nothing to do all day, and was living in an apartment in Leesburg with his mom who also has a disability. And he was really just completely unsupervised. Hanging out in this apartment complex, he ended up hanging out with several 7-, 8-year-old boys because those were his peers. They would come knocking on his door every day. They were asking him to come out and play. He would be out there with him. And several times, these boys would get into a lot of trouble, and they would do something which I didn't even know what was before, but they would pants him, pull his pants down. They would do this to each other. They would do this to him. They were doing a lot of things to him where he felt like he was being bullied. His aunt, so his mom's sister, really kind of came in to help with the situation, and they did go to the police station and make a report that he was being bullied. The police kind of blew it off because here's a 22-year-old saying that 7-year-olds were bullying him. About 2 weeks later, the police come to his door and he's arrested. The story that the mother of these kids or the kids, I'm not really sure, told the police was that he was pulling his own pants down and asking the kids to touch him. So Troy was arrested and he spent 6 weeks in jail, and it was a horrible situation for him. Actually, the inmates were very nice to him, and actually the public defender's office told us that they were getting calls from the inmates saying, you have to help this guy. He was doing a lot of self-injurious behavior while he was in there, tremendous anxiety. And about 6 weeks into it, he was taken to the hospital because of how he was injuring himself. And after that, they ended up sending him home on, with an ankle bracelet. The case, he was found incompetent to stand trial. So I don't know if everyone knows this, but when you're found incompetent, they then put you through this process of restoration where they're seeing if they can restore you to competency, which in the disability community is just the craziest thing because you're not going to restore them so that they don't have an intellectual disability anymore.
We would love that.
It's amazing. So it's amazing that they think they can do that. So they take several weeks to do that. He was found unrestorable. But then what happened was they then, because this was a sexual offense, they have to see whether he's a violent sexual predator, because if he's a violent sexual predator, he may have to be civilly committed so that he doesn't hurt anyone else. So for an entire year, there's kind of this threat over the family that he could still be locked up. In the meantime, he can't live in that neighborhood anymore, so then he has to live with his aunt, but his aunt has a child in the home. They can't have any friends over because he can't be around any children. He can't travel out of the state. His benefits were all dropped when he was incarcerated, so they're having trouble to get that all. So things kind of spiral out of control, not to mention just the stress and the anxiety, and he's regressing, and it was really a complete nightmare. I'll say that when he was first questioned that first day by the police, we have a 2.5-hour videotape of the interrogation where we timed it, and I think his Miranda rights were read to him, and he agreed, to talk to them within 7 seconds. So there was no explanation or testing for understanding or anything like that. And throughout the entire interrogation, it's very obvious that he doesn't understand what he's being asked. He's changing around his answers. He wants to please them. So first, why did you let these 7-year-olds? Why would they influence you? You're 22. Well, how could a 7-year-old tell you what to do? Well, they kept knocking on my door. Okay, 5 minutes later, they asked the same question. Obviously, they didn't like that answer, so I'll say, well, they were doing it to each other also. Okay, I guess I didn't like that answer. The next time, he comes up with C, and he keeps going back and forth between A, B, and C, whatever answer could make them happy. So you can see during the interrogation that he's just searching for how he can please them. He's grilled about whether he uses drugs, alcohol, about his sexual history. I mean, this is someone who has honestly no interest in girls, no interest in boys, just kind of asexual at this point in his life, and it's very upsetting. So when about a year into it, when we still had this threat of civil commitment, I went and spoke to the Commonwealth attorney and said, is this really the case that you want to prosecute? Could you please watch the video yourself? I don't know who gave the okay for this prosecution, but watch it yourself, please, and tell me if this is what you want to prosecute. And he did watch it, and he did drop the case. Now, that wasn't the end of it for us, because what happens to the next Troy who comes along, and that same, and the same police officers and the same interrogators and the court system and the whole thing. And so we brought it to the Department of Justice. And, yes.
What is there a consequence, and what is the consequence for, since you had the 2-hour video, you see the officers questioning Troy, and it's very clear to you and to the other prosecutor that they ignored, clearly they had to have known that Troy didn't understand the Miranda rights. He was giving them all kind of answers. Is there a consequence for the officers to ignore that?
Right. So for us, the consequence is that they were violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, because when the police have a duty under the ADA to make reasonable modifications to their policies and procedures if the person has a disability. Now, his aunt, halfway through the interrogation, when he was picked up, his mother told them of his disability. They should have known of it because he had filed a report a couple of weeks before. Whether they connected all that, I don't know, but they had a duty to. And then his aunt showed up at the station halfway through the interview, because they leave the room and they come back in. Anyway, so there's also long periods of time where they leave the room and they're probably observing him, but it's being tape recorded where he's talking to himself and saying things, and he doesn't even know why he's there. He thinks you can hear through the things he's saying that he thinks he's there because of something completely different. So he thinks he's there to report about someone who's done something wrong in his neighborhood. He has no idea what's going on. For us, the way to what happens to the police officer, what happens to the police department or whatever, is we did bring the case to the Department of Justice. There's one attorney there, Steve Gordon, who does ADA compliance, who is a sibling of someone with a disability, and this is his passion and his life's work. And he opened an official investigation, and it's actually ongoing. It's been going on for about a year. It takes them a very long time, but Leesburg had to send them all of, boxes and boxes of their own documents. They go back and forth, and so it's currently still an open case with the Department of Justice. And I would say that makes them sit up a little straighter. It makes them put their things in order. They now have hired a ADA coordinator for the police department, because they hadn't done any of the things they were supposed to do. We will be using that video once the DOJ case is over as a training video on what not to do. The family is fine with it, and the sheriff's department will use it. So it's different in Loudoun. Leesburg Police is different than the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. So it's two different organizations. So right now that's an open case, and that has really influenced us a lot to start this positive interactions with law enforcement program because things went really bad really fast. I'll tell you kind of the other two much quicker. The Alexandria case was actually a parent called me. She was in her 80s. Her son was like in his maybe upper 50s. He had been with an intellectual disability working for the federal government for the EPA for maybe like 30 years, starting in the mailroom and doing duties such as that. And it kind of goes to what Ashley was saying about how you want to integrate your family members into the community as much as you can, but this was like the other side of it. Like when this is all over, his mother said to me, I wish I had never done this. Like I wish I had never pushed him to be part of the whole community. I wish I had kept him safe in this other kind of environment. And it was really sad because of how his whole career there ended. So he was on the computer and probably looking at pornography and ended up on a child pornography site and was arrested for child pornography. He did this at work on his work computer and was caught. And so this went on for quite a while as well. His union was able to negotiate a retirement for him. I mean, he worked there for so many years, but he had to leave his job. And we did end up getting the case dismissed. Luckily, the prosecutor was sympathetic to the issue, and it was dismissed. They immediately left the state, and he's on like a cowboy ranch, amazing like community for people with disabilities now in Texas. What I saw with that and when I did research is that child pornography is one of those things where in a lot of states it's an automatic jail time. And for people with disabilities who have normal sexual feelings but do not have the relationships or the social groups or anyone to experiment with or do anything with, the computer is their safe place, and these things happen. And he may not have even been able to recognize that the people in the picture were children. So it can happen a lot faster than you think. And one of the biggest things I learned from this was just and I think it's like my last slide, monitor that internet or take it away or monitor the phone because it can happen really, really fast and be really serious. We have a case going on right now where 22, 23-year-old with an intellectual disability in Ohio was on some kind of text messaging program and ended up hooking up via text with a 12-year-old in Loudoun County, a girl. And they sent each other pictures of themselves, I guess, pornographic pictures. He was arrested, brought to Loudoun County to stand trial. This was extremely hard on the family because it's 6 hours away. And the family drove here like overnight and were like sleeping in their car in the Walmart parking lot. They didn't have money for a hotel. I think the public defender's office ended up paying for them to have somewhere to stay during the case, but they had been going back and forth. So his case, he was found incompetent. Then they go to do the restoration process. Can we restore him to competency again? This can normally be done outpatient, but because he lives in Ohio and he has nowhere here to stay, he is currently in the Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute on the Inova Fairfax campus. And so he's locked in there since January while they're trying to restore him. We just visited him there last week. He calls me crying. They're telling him that they think he's faking it, that he's not concentrating hard enough, that they want to medicate him because they think his anxiety is getting in the way of him learning the material. So all day long he's in groups, like to learn about what you wear to court and how everything to restore him. just like, it's really unbelievable. We actually met there with the, it's not the Commonwealth Attorney, it's the Attorney General's office, because it's an interstate case. The Assistant Attorney General met us there with the public defender and me to try to like figure out what's going on, but the doctors there, they say they specialize in this, but they obviously don't. So we'll be discussing this in court on the 12th. So it's still ongoing, and it just shows all the problems that we still have in the system. Yes.
Would it be unrealistic, or maybe how realistic would it be for police stations, or I don't know how the breakup of every level, whether it's city or state offices, when there is a particular case, then if you know a person has a disability, there is a special education representative. I think you said ADA coordinator earlier.
Right.
But reach out to that person, that's like part of the protocol, so that there is a larger understanding versus relying on people who aren't trained and have no experience, or may not have any experience working with people.
I agree with you. So Ashley had mentioned the ARC of New Jersey. They have a program that I'm kind of dreaming of creating, okay? So their program, their criminal justice advocacy project, they actually have a whole system set up there where so it's people who are involved with their county services. So if someone who gets developmental services through the county gets arrested, their program is notified. They have kind of a social worker or community worker who then helps them put together what they call a individualized justice plan. Is that it? Personalized justice plan. There you go. Where they actually look like, let's say even in Troy's case, they would say, you know, he needs, like, what do we need to keep, if you're worried about him, to keep the community safe, what would you need to do? Well, he needs a place to live, he needs a day program, he needs a waiver. I will say in that case, the Department of Justice got involved and basically made Loudoun County give him an emergency waiver. So I didn't give you kind of the happy result for him, is that he's now in a group home, he's in a day program, he's doing wonderfully. The personalized justice plan is basically going out and looking at what does this person need? Do they need counseling services? Do they need housing? Do they need this kind of support or that kind of support? And putting together a plan where they submit it to the judge and to the other parties in the case saying, like, this is the person's disability, this is what it means, that disability, this is how maybe it manifests itself with this person, you know, or how it could have affected this case. These are the kinds of things that this person needs to kind of be safe and secure in the community, and we've already put it together for you. So how about instead of jail time or whatever, we all sign on to this plan? And I'm not sure if that, I mean, it probably, you know, like we were talking about, there are people with disabilities who commit crimes. So I don't know what the appropriate things are for each person, but it would personalize it based on their disability and what their needs are. And so I would love, we're sort of beginning, I'm going to tell you what we're doing in Loudoun and how we're trying to get to that point where we can have a program like that. So I'll tell you quickly what we're doing. So first of all, you know, Scott Campbell is here, and he does trainings for years now on this kind of thing. And actually, it's probably the first training that I went to because you invited me, and that's where I met Sergeant Linda. And so Scott, jump in if you want to jump in to any of these, add anything to it. So we're training first responders. Scott, when I told him that I had this case and was interested in this, he introduced me to Sergeant Linda Cerniglia in Loudoun, who runs she is in charge of all the training for the crisis intervention teams. And those are the teams that focus on teaching officers how to de-escalate and handle crises with people with mental health issues and developmental disabilities, and we're trying to push more of the disability education on them. So they come about once a month to our campus, and they go to our school, they meet our students, they meet people who work on campus, and then we do a classroom portion of it where we try to teach them to really be able to, the keys are to identify the disability and to understand how to de-escalate. So we work on that with first responders right now. We've been doing police, and Scott just told me he was able to train the fire and rescue. They've never been trained. It's just unbelievable that they haven't been trained. We trained the 911 call centers. just in the last few months, and they had never, the Loudoun 911 call centers had never received any training on disabilities before. After our training with them, we said, and we audio taped conversations with people with different disabilities, because all they're doing is hearing it over the phone. So it was interesting. They kind of closed their eyes and listened to the audio tapes to try to really hear things. And we said something like, do you think you've had phone calls like this? Have you talked to people maybe with autism or this and that? And a guy raised his hand and said, I think I've always assumed they're drunk, that the person's drunk, for real. And so, very upsetting, and I think that is what happens a lot with law enforcement and 911 and whatever, is that their first thought is this person's on PCP if they're running around naked in the winter, or this person is drunk or some kind of drugs. So we just want to make sure it's in their head that when they're going through the list in their head quickly of what could be going on here, that a developmental or intellectual disability is one of those things that they can think through.
I have a happy story.
Oh, good. Tell us. Tell us a happy story.
I was sick Easter Sunday, and I asked, so both my daughters have Down syndrome, and I asked my younger daughter, she closed the door on me while I was being ill, and I said, you need to keep the door open. And then I asked her to call 911. And she called, and the person on the phone was very patient. I could tell, I didn't hear what she was saying, and Sky, who doesn't speak very clearly, was getting a little frustrated, but she kept it cool, and she kept repeating herself and doing better, and the woman told her to go down and unlock the front door, and she went down and did that, and came back up and got the information through, and then hung up, and about 35 seconds later, Sky called back again because they weren't there yet. And the woman said they should be at your front door any minute because Vienna was 8 minutes from the fire station. But they came, and they were also very good with the girls. I could hear, in the background that they did a really good job getting them, because Sheridan was still in a nightgown and said, get dressed, go in, shut your door, get your clothes on while you're in there, hurry up. And so that went really well. I don't know if they received training or if they were just good people.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. I always love a good story. So something.
Let me give you another one.
Okay, go for it.
Last week, a parent called me, a family we know very, very well. They had a son with autism who's about as old as my son, which is 19. Really getting aggressive, was beating up mom. They called 911, and the officer showed up and de-escalated the situation, dealt with the behaviors, did basically everything you would hope anyone would possibly do. And I don't know that if they're part of the 3,000 plus officers I've trained since 2005 or not, but she emailed me to say that it couldn't have turned out any better. So that's a good thing.
Do you want to hear the bad story?
Yeah,
Go for it.
Well, my daughter has fetal alcohol syndrome, and her dog was hit by a car. She got out of control, couldn't manage her emotions, and she weighs about 90 pounds. And a police officer threw her to the ground, and she was arrested for disorderly conduct, and had to pick up trash on the highway to get the charge dismissed. And we ended up having to pay the public defender's office.
How old is she?
Now she's 21. This happened when she was about, I think, 19 or 20.
It's unbelievable.
She would do this same thing again.
Like I said to you before, I would behave that way too if my dog was hit. Yeah. Yeah, it's so.
But there was no realization that maybe you shouldn't throw a 90-pound disabled girl to the floor after her dog was hit by a car.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. So one of the things that, it's on another slide, but it's kind of relevant now, is that, and I think, do you all know Sharon Cummings and her son Connor? So they're wonderful advocates as well, and she creates what she calls a business plan for him for everything they do around the house. They write up a plan. He likes to have everything written out, so she had what she called a business plan on how to call 911 written for him by her bedside. She's a single mom, and she said, if mommy ever doesn't wake up, this is what you need to do. And he's had to do it twice now, and it has things in there like, you're doing a great job, Connor, Mommy's so proud of you, you know, go open the door and do this. I mean, it talks them through every step of it, and it's really a great idea, you know, if you have a child who reads and who would, you know, in the moment think to look through it, to actually write it out, exactly what they should do for any emergency situation. So we're doing things to train parents. We've gone to Alexandria and other places. The Bar Association or Continuing Legal Ed has had us come in and do trainings for local attorneys. On our campus, we have created curriculum for the students to learn about safety, about when they see an officer, what do you do, and we create stories for them. What did you call it? Social stories. Social stories. To teach them how to handle these kind of situations. For our older adults in our supported employment program, we have a police officer that comes once a month just to talk to them about safety stuff. So we kind of were trying to hit it from every single direction we possibly can. DMV, you can now get on your license or an ID card an indicator. I think they list about 6 different kinds of disabilities. 5? Okay, 5. And so they come to our campus, and I know they come here as well, every 6 months. So instead of having to go to DMV and wait in line for hours, because I know none of the kids who go to our school could do that, we set up 10-minute appointments, so you know exactly when you're going to be seen. It's in our nice, comfortable room that they know. We have food out. It's very comfortable. We have a quiet area for people, so we make it super easy, not just to get these ID cards, but for a parent who never has the ability to go to the DMV, anyone who has someone with a disability in their family who would have a hard time going can come and do any transaction there. So it's every 6 months here and in Loudoun. And then our disability response team and the Pathways to Justice training. So we did apply for that grant. We'll be the first, I believe, in the state of Virginia. And we've created a disability response team, and this training that we're doing is a full-day training, 9 to 5 at Ida Lee Rec Center on May 23rd. So I'll hand out my cards, and you can go on, and it's free, and invite anyone else who you think it would be helpful for. Our disability response team, so we have on it people from the Sheriff's Department. We have the superintendent of the Juvenile Detention Center, a couple of public defenders, people from the Community Services Board, from Loudoun Abused Women's Shelter, and Troy and his aunt are also on the team. And from the Parent Resource Center, from Loudoun County Public Schools as well. And so we've been meeting once a month. We actually meet today, once a month for, I don't know, at least 6 months or so, or longer, planning for this training. But also, my hope is that when the training is over, we'll continue to work together to address some of the things like in the court system. You know, I know that I think Fairfax County may have a really nice booklet for families if they have someone with a disability and they enter the court system that kind of spells everything out for them. Just continue to train different people in the community, and if someone does get arrested, we have this network to talk to each other. I have to say this, we call her Sergeant Linda. The Sheriff's Department has been an unbelievable partner with us. They are really have welcomed this whole issue with open arms to do more and more trainings with us. And I mean, we did have, when the young man from Ohio was brought down here and arrested, and his family called me in a complete panic. It was a Friday night, and I called Sergeant Linda on her cell phone and said, we have a guy, he's in custody, they're not letting his family see him, he's absolutely hysterical, this is what's going on, we need a CIT trained deputy to be assigned to him, we need blah, 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 and she was on it. She took care of it. So these relationships, I would say more than anything, it's like building these relationships with the different people in the community. And letting them know that I'm not there to say whether someone is guilty or innocent, but we're there to make sure that they understand their disability and that they receive the appropriate accommodations and modifications under ADA that they are entitled to. So we're there to just make sure everyone is on their toes with that. Yes?
Share is for example, your registration process. So for example, I have a cousin who's identified on the spectrum, with Asperger's, and so he drives, and he's registered such that if police officers want to run his plates, then it should come up on their computer in their squad car that they have autism and he also is hearing impaired. So someone needs to sign to communicate with him. For other, it may not be, that technology may not exist or be that sophisticated in other places in the country. And so when or if parents are allowed to register their son or their daughter, is there still an opportunity as their son or daughter gets older, they may say, I don't want you to out me out to the police. I don't want them to know, it's my choice. That was the parents' choice when they were younger, but now they have an opportunity to change. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think if someone has a guardianship over someone, then that parent who has the guardianship, depending on the parameters of the guardianship, would be making that decision for that person. If they don't, then that individual has the right to make that decision themselves.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what I didn't catch is
Talk
where.
to me afterwards. I have lots of things you can help you out.
Okay.
There's a program called Autism FYI, which is a national registry. It just begun a couple of years ago. It basically connects that person's name back to the local jurisdiction, law enforcement jurisdiction. But there's also a placard, which I have a copy of. You won't have to get your own because it's my only one. That's specific for deaf, hard of hearing. That says, this is it, and it's put on the visor. So if he's ever pulled over, just simply flips it up, and then they'll be able to see the part before even they say word one. And on the back then is a communications guide to help with the communication. So there actually is lots of things that are possible. But I think you're going to talk about 911 flag sheets, which is my favorite thing.
Yeah.
So.
Can you do that with DMV here? Sorry, I didn't catch what state. Where did you say that?
That was in Nevada.
Nevada. So can you do that here?
So with
where that's with DMV?
So if you have the indicator on your license, they should, when they run it, be able to see that now.
Well, it'll be in your driver's license.
It's on the actual driver's license
But
card.
you request it as a parent? Is that was my
Yeah.
question? Because my son is right about there, about to get
I have the form here.
Okay.
But it's not
Yeah.
just a driver's license. If your child
An ID
doesn't have
card.
a driver's license.
An ID card as well.
Plus $10.
You can actually get it as a younger kid. Like,
Yeah.
you don't even have to be 16.
No.
You can get it as a 10-year-old, as an 8-year-old. You can get an ID card.
From the DMV?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And working with, I'm from the PRC here over
Oh,
in
okay.
Alexandria, and some parents are nervous too that I've talked to before about letting other people know about their child's disability. For the simple fact, just like you gave with Troy about the officers, they ignored the fact that they're working with this young adult with a disability. They totally ignored it, and so he kind of went down this, it was a spiral journey. And so they're thinking like, gosh, they may run into the wrong police officer who might try and out them or try and connect them and exploit them in some way. And so
I think hiding it is the most dangerous thing you can do. Yeah, it's the absolute most dangerous thing you can do is hide it.
Very little trust with the police officer or justice.
Well, if the police officers don't know you have a disability and they can't tell just in the first few seconds, they have no obligation to modify any policy or procedure, and no obligation to do anything different.
So at the very least, this can hold someone accountable, hold the people accountable, hold the officers accountable, because
you want everyone to know. I mean, from what I get that from a privacy point of view or whatever, there are people who themselves don't want to tell everyone. From a safety perspective, you want every single person to know. And I have this on another slide, but we'll go into it now, which is that you want your neighbors to know, you want local businesses to know, you want everyone at your school to know, the school resource officer to know, you want, really your job, you want every person that individual is going to come in contact with to know from a safety perspective. If they're wandering, people will know who he is. If there's a fight or it escalates, you know what I mean? You want everyone to know, and that's the safest way, really. So the 911 flag sheet, so that's on my slide of what you can do. So we'll get to that in a minute. The only other thing I'll say is that press and PR, we want to get the word out about what we're doing and that this is an issue, and we want everyone thinking about it. So when we do have trainings, when we have this Pathways to Justice, when the things that we're doing with the police, we do try to get TV stations there, we try to get newspapers there, because we want as much as possible to get the word out that this is an issue. Okay, what you can do, and we're going to go through them kind of one by one. Okay, so relationships, first responders. So you want all first responders, honestly, to know your loved one. I would bring them to the police station and introduce them. I would bring them to the fire station. I would develop relationships. You know, they have drive-alongs and things that you can do. The police actually love doing this, and probably the fire department as well. Okay, not all, but a lot of them do. You'll find someone at your station who likes to do this. I learned from Scott about 911 flag sheets that I talk about, where you actually create, and he does this for his son and updates it every year with them, a sheet that has a picture of your child. So I think I have a whole, here we go, we'll go to here, a picture of them, their name, their age, physical description with a picture that you update every year, family contact information. Here are the places you may see me. I love to go to the McDonald's. I love to go here. This is my school. This is where I go for art class, whatever. This is my neighborhood. And what you need to know about me. Don't touch me. Don't talk too loud. Don't keep your sirens on. Don't, you know, this is how to approach me. I get really upset about X, Y, and Z. This is the best way to de-escalate me. Call my parents before you talk to me. Anything you would want them to know if 911 was called and they were coming to your house. You want to tell them, let them see your child, and update it every single year and keep that relationship going.
It looks a lot like this.
Where you give that to each of those individuals?
You can get it online. I'll give you
Bring it to your police station and fire station.
Oh, okay, right.
So I'll mention also bus drivers. We have a lot of issues with transportation in the public school system where things happen on the bus. So we do try to, I know. We try to do training for bus drivers. We're going to be trying to do another one. We have board-certified behavior analysts on our campus. That's who run our school. Everything we do is with ABA, and so we've done trainings with them, but we will be doing more.
Can you go back? You didn't mention, well, you kind of
What did I say?
glanced over it for the school resource officers.
Yes.
How important that is.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, because of the confidentiality issues around the IEP, they're not aware of who the children are. So you introduce your kids to the SRO so that they know. You can invite the school resource officer to your IEP meeting.
Yeah, I would highly recommend, if your child has behaviors, any kind of aggression, absolutely make sure your SRO knows everything about them. Yes.
I would also worked as a special education coordinator at a high school, and would regularly connect to SROs or whoever's in charge of the SROs in the entire school, give them copies of the BIPS, Behavior Intervention Plan, so they were aware of what were the triggers and what were certain behaviors of students on the front end before just having to react to behaviors that had no experience with.
Yep. Yeah, it's really important. I've heard from some people that they won't just give it to them because they have to have parents sign off, but I think most parents would want them to know.
Well, for me personally, for our son, at the beginning of every school year, we give the SRO a copy of his behavior intervention plan.
Yeah.
And then they can't say, I didn't get it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And I've been training with SROs in the last year for Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William counties. Specifically with the SROs.
Yeah.
More stuff.
So interestingly, you know, this work that we've been doing with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, I feel excited because I feel like it's starting to take on a life of its own, where they're actually proactively creating their own programs. And one really amazing SRO at Seneca Ridge Middle School in Sterling has created her own what they call Project First Responder. So I know Scott taught me a lot about what Smart 911 is, which is sort of a software package that we wanted the 911 call centers to integrate into their system so that people could input information about their family members if 911 was ever called, kind of like the 911 flag sheet, but all online, so that they would have it and it would come up as soon as it was called. So
No one has wanted to spend the money to do that, but this SRO at Seneca Ridge Middle has started kind of a paper version of that herself, where she's asking people to fill out their own kind of 911 flag sheet with her, turn them in, and they will input them into some system where it will come up for them. So they're kind of on their own now, starting to take ownership of this and look for ways to make a difference and be more effective.
Yeah, the Smart 911 online 911 system, the only jurisdiction that is signed on to do that anywhere in Northern Virginia is actually the Alabama. They just agreed last month to do that.
I know, okay, so we talked about this. I realize we're like almost out of time, so I'm going to go kind of quickly. So practice, like we talked about before, create social stories for them as a victim, as the accused, and go through what it would feel like and what you say, and so they're comfortable with that. Teach your loved ones how to ask for help. You know that police officers aren't bad. You can go to them and ask for help also. The business plans we talked about, practicing with officers, scripting a 911 call, all of these kind of came up just during our conversation. Miranda rights is one more thing I want to talk about. We had one of the public defenders come and meet with our supported employment group. We have like our self-advocacy group, and we went through each part of the Miranda rights, and really the most important thing, if you're going to remember one thing, is just tell them, ask for a lawyer, no matter what. That's saying, I want my mom, saying I want my teacher, I want to go home. You can ask for anyone else, and it'll be completely ignored. It means nothing. Just say, I want a lawyer. As soon as the police talk to you, I want a lawyer. Once they say that, the questioning will stop, and they'll be given the opportunity to get a lawyer. It is the one main thing you need to teach people, is just ask for a lawyer.
And the class I teach for law enforcement and for families, the video I show, 4 folks are asked with autism, are asked, do you waive your right to remain silent? And all 4 people go, sure, I waive my right. I have absolutely no idea what that means. Yeah, it's clueless. So.
Right. We teach them, when we do the CIT classes and whatever, test for understanding. Unless it's an urgent situation where you have to like interrogate this person right that second because, someone is in danger or something, take your time, slow it down, do not ask yes/no questions, ask open-ended questions, say a line of the Miranda rights, ask them to explain it back to you. I mean, this is what they should be doing. I don't know if it's ever done that way, but that's what we ask people to do. And I'll just say, this is the last slide, just really, I can't say enough, supervising the internet and phone. Almost every single criminal case has something to do with one or the other, I feel like. And so, that's it. Thank you. Yes?
You asked about the ask for a lawyer. Is there a time frame that, all questions will cease until the lawyer arrives, or can anyone, can they ask like
they can't ask you one more, they cannot ask you one more thing.
Do you watch SVU?
I know.
That happens all the time.
Technically, if you ask for a lawyer before they give you your Miranda rights, they can continue until they give you your Miranda rights, and then you ask for a lawyer.
Okay.
Legally speaking.
So
if you ask for a lawyer when you're first arrested before you get your Miranda rights,
What?
they can still question you.
Absolutely. I have to leave at 12.
Once you're given your Miranda rights, that is the trigger for when you ask for a lawyer, all questioning must stop and they cannot talk to you until a lawyer comes.
Right.
And that also gets pushed too, where they'll still keep talking, they just won't ask you questions. And so it gets very murky with that.
But the person with the position just be quiet.
Don't say anything
Yes,
I'm asking
quiet,
for a lawyer. That's what I would say, is
Okay.
just don't say a word other than ask for a lawyer.
Okay.
Scott has a lot to add. I have to be back in Leesburg at 1, so I have to run. But thank you all. Thanks for having me. I'll leave a couple of cards here, actually, if you want to. I would love for you to sign up for our
May 23rd.
May 23rd.
See you there.
I have the link for the registration.
Okay, good.
Okay.
It's linked to our website.
Scott Campbell, unstructured person, to talk. I've laid out, this is the usual stuff I put out for families. I've been doing, I have a son with autism. This is him. In this picture, he's 9. He just turned 19, so it's the only picture I have of the 2 of us. It's when I'm still on active duty. I'm a retired Army officer. I've been doing this since 2005. I've done over 350 training sessions. and I've trained roughly 3,000 officers just in Northern Virginia. I'm also part of a thing called VAPSAC, we just renamed ourselves, which is the Virginia Autism Public Safety Advisory Council, which for years has had people in the fields training EMTs, training law enforcement, training lawyers in Virginia, have been doing it for a while. We're not doing as much as we would like, almost everybody ever is, but there's folks that do that sort of thing and have done that sort of thing. I train almost everybody except lawyers. By the way, I'm the only person probably here that has turned down going to law school. Yeah. The Army goes, do you want to go to law school or blow stuff up? I'll blow stuff up. My little spiel, like I said, there's lots of stuff here. There's one of the most important things is the top 10 things. The number one of the top 10 thing is the 911 flag sheet. There's also a sheet here on what you do if you're arrested, and there's things to deal with that sort of situation. A slightly different story than what was told already. There was a man in his late 20s in Upper New York State, a janitor in one of the local schools. He had autism, pretty high functioning, and kind of one of the things you were mentioning earlier. His thing in his spare time, he went to the bank, local bank, to play with the pens on the end of the chains. It's just his thing. And one day somebody robbed the bank, kind of looked like him, so they brought him in, and they did the investigation, and they're interrogating him, doing the good cop, bad cop routine, and he pled guilty to robbing a bank he didn't rob. He was in prison for 3 years until, ironically, the person that actually robbed the bank ended up in the same prison he did. And kind of to his credit said, nah, he didn't rob the bank, I robbed the bank. And eventually it took him another year to go through the processes to get him out of prison. But he was in 4 years for a bank robbery he did not commit. So, I mean, it happens.
That's here?
No, Upper New York State. But there are folks that do training. The ARC's great. You know, my card's there. You can grab me if you have issues. Call me. I used to live in Fairfax County. I now live in Alexandria, ironically. So I'll talk to you about criminal justice situations. Do the training all the time. Yesterday, I did a training class with all of the brand new officers for Fairfax County. Last week, I did training at the Parent Resource Center in Fairfax County. And I been training all the new officers in all of Northern Virginia for about, about 4 years, actually longer than that, because there's two academies. There's one for Fairfax, and there's one for everybody else in Northern Virginia, of course. So I've been training actually more of them at the one at the everywhere else for longer. And the CIT training classes, been doing those classes for, 10 years. And Loudoun County is far in the front of everybody else right now. I've been doing training classes with them every month for the last 2 years. So, yes, ma'am.
So when you do the training, is the emphasis on autism, or is it all ID and DD?
I know autism, okay, but my son also has ID. Okay, so honestly, it's on both. Okay, I mean, I use the word autism throughout it, but a lot of the slides I have developmental disabilities. It's not specifically to autism. A lot of the criminal studies that have been done, the few criminal studies that have been done, are almost always on individuals with developmental disabilities in general, not just autism. In fact, only lately have they been specifically on autism at all. So again, the 911 flag sheet is the key thing. The other thing in Fairfax is the Diversion First program, which is now in its second year, where if you have somebody with developmental disability, substance abuse issue, mental health issue, they take them over to what's called the Merrifield Center, which isn't too far away. And they take them through that program. If they just suspect there's something different here, they don't go to jail first. They go through there for an evaluation and possible assistance and hopefully diversion from going into the criminal justice system in the first place. And that is talking to people, officers have been in it, lawyers, the Commonwealth attorneys and all. It's been incredibly successful in diverting a lot of people out of the jail system that could have potentially ended up there. The other thing that's available in again, unfortunately only in Fairfax, is the thing called a Yellow Dot program, which they just started last September. And this is begun by the fire department, ironically, where if I can get it open, you put the little yellow dot on the back window of your car, and then inside the car you have this thing. This is an older version by the Autism Society. Explains, okay, this is what's different with this person in the car. This isn't just for disabilities, it's also for the elderly too. Folks are insulin dependent or some, deaf, hard of hearing, any sort of disability of any kind. This is a brand new program that they started. The online 911 system, we've been working on that for 4 years to try to get it together in Fairfax. Has not happened for budgetary reasons. That's why, in my mind, the best way right now is to do the 911 flag sheet. That's where you're gonna get the biggest bang for your buck. You have to update it at least once a year. I took it into my local police station 12 years ago for my son. I went in uniform, which helped too, and said, hi, I got a kid with a disability. Here's this kid with disability. Here's my 911 flag sheet. Talked to the woman behind the little glass counter there with the cutout, and it turned out she had a child with disability herself. I took it toward the station, talked to the lieutenant who was in charge of the shift that night, ended up doing training with every shift on that station. I've now done that twice over the last 12 years. And at the end of one of those trainings, an officer came up to me and he said, hi, yeah, I know all about your son. I'm like, I know you well about my son. Well, it turns out he was the officer assigned to our neighborhood. And the 911 flag sheet for our son, he had it in his book. He carried it with him at all times. And he read it, because I quizzed him on it. When he was having his prayer ring break each day, that's what they call donuts. He read it, and I quizzed him. He really did know this sheet. And as a parent of a child with significant disability, that's where I would hope my local law enforcement be. But it unfortunately is incumbent upon the parent to proactively, talk to your local 911 system, your local fire department, your local police department, and begin the conversation. If you have an individual that's a runner, Project Lifesaver, which is a whole other program, which has been very, very, very successful, and has saved thousands of lives. Yes, ma'am.
So Scott, if you just go into the police station with the 911 flag sheet, do you also recommend taking your child with a disability with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Put a public face to it.
Presumably you haven't made an appointment, you've just literally walked in off the street.
But you could make an appointment. You can make an appointment with almost every station has a thing called the community policing officer.
Okay.
Who, that's kind of where they go. But the mechanism I recommend is the 911 flag sheet.
Okay.
That's the way to get that to, just to begin the conversation.
Just the first ride.
Okay. So that's where we're at. Anybody have any? I just got through doing this class last Thursday. The Parent Resource Center, so it's all still fresh in my head. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. With the Yellow Dot program, how do you get registered for that, or what do you do?
You simply go to your local fire department, and they should have this packet. Unfortunately, I can give you this one.
Okay.
Because it's really hard sometimes using what station to get them, but I was at another event last Tuesday, and the fire department was there, and I mentioned I couldn't get these packets, and the guy goes, oh, well, here, he hands me an entire bag of them.
Right.
So I'm pretty well stocked for now, so I can give you this one.
Is that registered into a database?
There's no registration. You put it on your car,
right.
And when they pull up and they, presuming this is fire EMT, they pull up and say, hey, there's something different, there's a yellow dot here. Unfortunately, it's a brand new program.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much awareness is there?
Well, you would hope firefighter EMTs know about it. That's about it. Police don't know about it.
Right.
I did a class 2 weeks ago or a few weeks ago at Loudoun Fire and Rescue. Same sort of thing, different county. And I showed this to them. I go, hey, so if you see someone in Fairfax County and they have this dot, this is what this means. Because they don't know. They have no idea.
Can you be as proactive as going and telling the police station about it?
With yellow dot,
I'm saying me, for example, if I'm a parent, you give me that, and I don't show the police station.
I do it as part of my training with the police departments. I mention it. Again, the Fairfax County Police Department is 2,000 officers. So it has to be done best in a systemic fashion.
Right.
To hopefully get the word across to them.
Maybe they have an internal communications person in-house that can know the route.
They talk to each other, but amazingly not terribly well, unfortunately. Any other questions? What to do, what not to do? Great stuff. Yes, ma'am.
The black sheet should go to police officers, firemen,
What you want to do is you want to get an annotation in the 911 system for your jurisdiction. And oh, by the way, if you live on the street that has Fairfax County on one side and Alexandria City on the other side, you need to talk to both of them, okay? But you take it into, my suggestion would be that your local police station, and then wait until they show you, they put something in the 911 system. There's only a very small text field, I think it's like 200 characters, that's in the 911 system, at least for Fairfax County. So for us it says, individual autism residents do not approach house with sirens on because there's noise sensitivities. Then go to book number, whatever, and pull that up and then read that or convey, depending what the issue is, the information to the responding agency. And I just did this, I do it at the beginning of every school year. I take it to the police station. That's just my way of remembering to do it. And I give it to his SRO at every single school year. And they walked in this last time I did it last September, walked in, I go, here's a new one. And they go, oh yeah, we know you, thank you very much. They took the old one down, put the new one up. I mean, it sits right in the middle of the wall of the main dispatch office in his local police station. Everyone's aware of them, so. But again, it's incumbent upon you to proactively talk to your local departments and begin the conversation, because it's not a matter of if your loved one will have an interaction with law enforcement. It's a when. I guarantee you, it's a when. They will. 7 times more likely than the general population, according to one study that was done. So it's not an if. It's going to happen. So that's more, and that goes back to the question about, you know, what if you haven't told them they have autism or they have an issue, or they don't disclose it? You're setting them up for failure, fortunately. One of the issues that came up recently, they're going to start using body cameras in a couple of months in Fairfax County. And what do you do about not having that FOIA released to the general public? How could we prevent that? I worked on the team to help set up those rules. And again, if you don't disclose, they don't know, and they're going to use their best judgment. And if they haven't had training, the assumption is that person's on meth or PCP. Okay, it's not that they have a disability. The assumption is meth or PCP or the drug, because that's the going in mentality if you've had no training, unfortunately. Sorry, I'll be around a few.
All right.
Thanks, Scott.
Sure.
Thank you guys so much for coming. Are we good? Do you have any additional questions overall? All good? All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.